It's time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Corn Myers. If you missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist, and you can also find a link in that description down below where you can buy this wonderful, wonderful book. Washing clothes. Mama washed clothes every Monday morning, no matter how cold it was. We would have to bring in buckets of water or chunks of ice in from the branch and heat it in a big tub on the stove. Mama always rinsed the clothes twice, so we'd have to tote in even more water or ice to do that. We didn't have a clothesline, so we just hung the clothes on the fences, trees, and anywhere off the ground to keep them clean. But in the wintertime, they would freeze stiff as a board into the shape of whatever they were hung over, and still would be wet when they thawed out, so we would usually hang them over chairs close to the stove. It didn't take them long to dry there, a turn or two, and they'd be done. During the drought in 1925, it was so dry that it was impossible to get a dipper full of water, let alone a bucket full, out of our branch. So Papa would tie the wash tubs full to overflowing with our dirty clothes and the firewood that Burl and I had gathered to a sled and drag it all the way down to the creek below Grandma's house. We always took along a big box of food that Mama had fixed up for our washing junket. We would usually just have cornbread and biscuits. We never had sandwiches back then. For one thing, we never had loaf bread. Mama never did bake bread. Mrs. Myers did, but she was about the only one around here, except the chapel women, who knew how to bake bread. Our absolute favorite things to go in the food box were the rhubarb pies that Mama had baked. She would send Burl and me to Mary's store with a couple of eggs to barter for sugar for her pies. We would savor every last bite of those pies. The creek was low, but we were able to get enough water out to get the clothes done. Papa and Burl built a fire close to the creek, and we put the tubs right on the fire to heat up the water. Mama boiled the clothes in lye soap and used a big stick to stir them around and then lift them out to dump them into the next tub to rinse them. That water was not quite as hot, and she would wring them out with her hands before putting them into the final rinse tub. Aunt Florrie would usually come along and help Mama, so Maggie and I would keep all the little ones entertained. We enjoyed it all, but to Mama and Papa it was an ordeal to make the best of. They usually did just that, making the best of whatever came their way. Couldn't really do any more than that. Did no good whatsoever to complain. We could hardly wait until all the clothes were washed, rinsed out, and hung around on the bushes to dry so we could eat those pies. After we ate, Mama would let us play down the creek a ways in the swimming hole while the clothes finished drying. We'd never heard tell of bathing suits. Mama wouldn't let us go in the creek unless we had breeches on that would cover us up, so we would wear some of Burl's old breeches or overalls. Aunt Florrie always wanted to go swimming with us, but she was so big she couldn't get into anybody's overalls. She'd have to pin her dress together all the way down between her legs. We thought that was so funny. She was like a big old walrus sliding down into that creek, and her dress would be all billowed up when she hit the water. We'd always had a lot of fun in the creek. Those were some of my best memories as a child. Maggie at Highland, ages 14 to 16, 1925 to 1927. The mission did a good job preparing the students in their studies, but it was next to impossible to prepare them for the social and cultural differences they would encounter at Highland. Most of the students were not able to adjust and stayed away from the community for no more than one term. The mission didn't really consider this a failure. It was a beginning. There was much progress being made in the entire community, and even the students who did not go on to high school benefited from their education at the mission. The influence of Ebenezer Mission went beyond the school itself. There were many families with members who attended the other activities of the mission, like Sunday school, sewing classes, and so on. In 1925, Miss Martson was able to get scholarships for both Maggie and Burl to attend Highland. Maggie was 17 when she went away to be in the 9th grade. They were both very promising students, and of course the whole family was proud of them. Well, the scholarships were good news for Burl and Maggie, but not so much for me. Oh, I was glad they could go all right, but their going away meant that I would have to be responsible for their chores, and in order to do that, I would have to quit school. The school and the mission, especially the mission workers, had not only become a part of my life, they were my future and my dreams, a big part of my hope for what could be. There was a rhythm to the seasons, and each one had its work. Our home life centered around family work, helping neighbors, and of course church. As a family, we had to work hard or we would not survive. It was all very basic. In the spring and summertime, we worked the farm, raising crops and animals for food and to barter or sell. In the late summer and fall, we harvested the crops and prepared food for the family and our animals, which we stored for winter. We gathered chestnuts and took them to town to barter. In the fall, we slaughtered enough of the animals to have meat to last until the next fall. We cured the meat and made soap. During the winter, we did the majority of the sewing and fixing up around the house, and as the weather permitted, we repaired the outbuildings and tools. Of course, we always had to tend to the animals. There was always something to do, so when a family member was sick or missing, it made a big difference. By this time, I was almost living at the mission, so I still did have many opportunities to learn from Miss Martson and Mrs. Henderson, even though I did not get to attend classes. Whenever I did finish my chores early, which didn't happen often, I would sit in on Miss Martson's class. Both Miss Martson and Mrs. Henderson knew I wanted to finish school there at Ebenezer so I could get a scholarship to Highland. I don't really think they ever had any doubts that I would be able to do just that. They had such faith. If that's what the Lord wants for you, Opal, that is exactly what will be. So don't worry yourself about it. You just do your chores and be thankful. It's the Lord's part to take care of the rest. Every night we would talk about school. I was always reading, and even though I wasn't able to attend classes, I had my books and kept up with my studies on my own. About this time, things began to change at Ebenezer. Of course, I didn't know what was causing it, and for that matter, I hardly noticed. I was so wrapped up in my own situation, and to this very day, I don't know what caused the changes at the mission. Maybe their support was declining because of the economy, or maybe the churches were focusing on other areas of need and no one was promoting Ebenezer Mission. Maybe it was Miss Martson's health. I never did find out. Many farmers all over the nation, even those with large amounts of land, were suffering and had been suffering since the early 20s when the prices of farm products fell about 40%. Some farmers had lost so much money they could no longer pay the mortgage on their farms. Around here, we were already poor, but we were self-sufficient for food and God-reliant for the courage and strength needed to grow and harvest that food. The changes at the mission were subtle. When a worker left, no one came to replace her. During the last year, only Miss Martson and Mrs. Henderson remained. Miss Martson taught all the grades now, as well as Sunday school, and Mrs. Henderson took care of the mission and a lot of the work in the community. Both of them were getting older, and I could tell that they were glad to have me spending the nights with them there at the mission. Of course, staying there was a pleasure for me. I loved the mission and the chapel women. I would get up early every morning, many times before even Mrs. Henderson got out of bed. I usually didn't fool with eating oatmeal and the things they normally cooked for breakfast. I'd just grab a piece of cornbread as I ran out the door to go to my home and start my day's work. There had always been a lot of work to do, and now with Burl and Maggie gone, there was all the more. I worked as fast and as hard as I could all day long, When I finished, I would run to the branch and wash up, pull on my dress, and go over to the mission. Preparing food. Most people didn't have many canning jars, but if they found jars for anything, it would be for berries. Sometimes people would dry berries, but most families didn't want to fool with that. There were other foods that were plentiful and well worth drying, like beans, pumpkin, apples, and peaches. Beatrice and I would bend over and pick green beans from the garden until our backs ached like they were breaking. Some of them we put into big tall nail kegs to pickle. We would usually do a barrel of beans, a barrel of cabbage kraut, and a barrel of turnip kraut. Guess not many people hear about turnip kraut these days, but it was fixed much the same way as it was with cabbage. We thought it was good. I guess those who have never tried it would think it had an odd taste. We also would string beans together with a needle and thread. When our string of beans was about 3 to 4 feet long, we would tie the ends together and hang it over a nail on the wall until they were dry, and then put them into sacks to keep them from getting dusty. When we were ready to use them, we would take a string out of the bag, soak them a little, or parboil them. Then we would take out the thread and cook them with fat meat. They're good. Most people really like them. To dry the pumpkins, we would slice them in rings and cut off the rind. Sometimes we would run a cord through the slices and then attach or tie the ends of the cord over the rafters. Other times we would run a stick through the rings and hang them. In a few days, when they were dry, we would put the pumpkin into cloth bags to keep the dust off them, just like we did with the shab beans. We would tie the bags from the rafters to store them out of the way until they were needed. When we wanted to make a pumpkin pie, we would take out what we needed, wash it, cut it up, and cook it. We basically did apples that same way too, cutting out the core, then slicing them. Next, they were strung across the room on a cord to dry. We stored sweet potatoes in big barrels by wrapping each one up in a piece of paper. The barrel was kept in the chimney corner by the fireplace where they would keep all winter. One of my favorite things that we fixed every year was sulfured apples. To prepare them, we put a little pan of sulfur down inside a big barrel and got it burning real good. Then we would put some sticks on to smother the fire and make smoke. The apples were put into a basket, then a stick was inserted through the basket handle and placed across the barrel opening so that the basket was suspended inside. We put a big hood over the top of the barrel and let the fire smolder, tending it from time to time. After the apples had been in there for most of the day, we would take them out and pack them in a big crock or can them. Whenever we wanted to eat them, we would take some out of the crock, wash them off, and fry them. They were so good. Some people would say they didn't like them because of the sulfur taste, but I never much noticed it. We use sulfur all the time for a disinfectant, too. A year or so ago, when I was stringing beans, the mailman came and said, "What in the world are you going to do with them beans?" When I told him we were going to eat them, he just kind of turned his head and shrugged his shoulders. I reckon he thought it was strange to go to all that trouble of picking out the good beans, snapping off the ends, and pulling the strings out, and then sitting there for hours running a needle and thread through them to sew them together when you could just go into town and buy a can at the store. Back when I was young, we didn't have much choice. With only a few exceptions, if you didn't grow it, or raise it, or gather it, you didn't eat it, and that was that. Ordered from Sears Roebuck. Even though I had to quit school to work, I was not resentful. I was content and felt fortunate to be able to spend my evenings and nights and whatever free time I had at the mission. In fact, I stayed at the mission so much that people would tease me saying, "Miss Martson must have sent off and ordered you from the Sears Roebuck." The chapel women were always sending in orders for something or other, and it just amazed us that people could, or for that matter would, actually order such things out of a catalog. Who ever heard of ordering cookies? Why, one time they even ordered dried fish. Of course, I was impressed, not necessarily with the dried fish, but with being able to look at pictures in the catalog and then just send in an order saying, I want this and this. Not to mention, I loved all that different food. The chapel women did eat many foods that we had never seen or heard of. They cooked and prepared their foods differently too, and always made their food look pretty. They called it garnishing. We didn't have many things at all that were pretty, and I don't guess it would have ever crossed our minds to make our food pretty. It wouldn't be pretty for long anyways. One time they invited the whole class from Sunday school over to eat dinner with them. They had fixed a pineapple salad, you know, a pineapple ring with a scoop of cottage cheese in the middle with a red cherry right on top. We had never seen pineapple before, and we had no idea what we were to do with it. Some of the younger children kind of played with theirs. They usually didn't like to eat strange food. Most of us just watched to see what the chapel women would do with theirs. One thing Mrs. Henderson and Miss Martson had that I liked was dried peaches. One time they had some of those peaches left out on the table, and I helped myself to some of them. It made me feel so bad. I thought that I was just awful because, you see, I felt like I had snitched them. Of course, I had to tell them I had stolen the peaches. They smiled and said that I hadn't stolen them. That's what they were out there for, to eat. We would always have especially nice and pretty meals when the superintendent of the mission would come visit. I always referred to him as Big Chief, although not to his face. I guess that was because everyone made such a big fuss about him, putting out the best of everything we had, the finest quilts on the bed, the fanciest scarves and doilies on the furniture, and of course we always made the dinner table especially pretty with flowers and such. We would even go out and gather fresh flowers to put in vases that would be placed in the bedrooms and in other places around the house. To me, living at the mission was always exciting. It was like being able to live two lives or in two completely different worlds at the same time. Why, I thought I was the luckiest person in the whole world. One time when Mrs. Henderson came back from one of her visits home, she brought a big old phonograph. It was the first one any of us had ever seen. She played several records and showed me all about how it worked. I guess we got a little loud playing the songs and trying to sing along with them. People could hear it all over, and pretty soon, before we knew it, the whole house was so full we couldn't get anyone else in. Mrs. Henderson put on this one record, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and everybody wanted her to play it over and over. Funniest thing, they all thought it was saying, "Somebody carry me home." And for the longest time, the people around here were singing, "Swing low, sweet chariot, somebody carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, somebody carry me home." Almost every night we sat downstairs and played the phonograph and talked until we were ready to go upstairs to bed. Sometimes there would be crowds of people there to listen, but more often than not, it would just be Miss Martson, Mrs. Henderson, and me. It was during that time in my life when God really became important to me. I had grown up knowing about God. I had learned from Miss Martson, Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Robinson, and the other chapel women early in my life that God was everything, all important. Papa had grown up going to church, and he and Mama went all the time after they were married. But it was listening to the chapel women talk about God and what he had done or was doing that made me realize that knowing him was more than just going to church. They loved him, adored him. I knew God loved us and gave himself for us, But I had no idea that a person could love God so much. How sweet. We'll stop right there for today. A very sweet place to stop. And really highlights the whole part we've been reading for several weeks, is how much Opal adored those mission ladies and how much they influenced her in all ways, from teaching her about things like pineapples. That was funny, wasn't it? But to teaching her about the Lord, and having her have faith in herself that she could be anything she wanted to be. And they were just amazing that they were part of her lives. Her life and the lives of everyone there around them too in that area. At the opening part of this, when her mother's having to wash those clothes, oh my goodness, I can't imagine. I wash a lot of clothes, but I've got it so easy. I just put them in the washing machine and turn it on, and then I can put them in the dryer and turn it on if I want to, if I don't want to hang out clothes or whatever. I mean, we're just so blessed here in the United States to be able to live like that. But that was such hard work. And it would have been hard work even like today if I had to wash my clothes and mats, and if I had to wash the towels and the sheets and all that, it would be terribly hard. But in those days, they did such manual labor that it would have been doubly hard, I think, because their clothes got so dirty. That was just the nature of their lifestyle. Now, if I'm working out in the garden, I get dirty. Today, Matt's been up on the mountain doing some work, so he's dirty. His blue jeans are dirty. I've seen them a minute ago. But in those days, every person would have got like that. You think about little kids, they get dirty because they spill stuff on them and they're crawling around and all that. But even the women and the children and got as dirty as the men because they were having to work in the gardens. They were having to carry wood. They were having to do all the things, And then Opal's told us they didn't have very much clothes either, so they had to wash their clothes to take care of them. And then thinking about for that big of a family, all the sheets and the things like that. Now, they probably didn't have sheets and covers like we do today, as many, if not at all. Probably didn't even have sheets, I would think. Y'all have to tell me what you think, but I don't think that would have been a thing. But they did have, they had some towels. They probably, again, didn't have a bathroom full of towels. Like I'm blessed, I have 2 bathrooms full of towels with cabinets full of towels, so they probably didn't have that. But still, such an undertaking and to scrub. And then her mother was very particular, so she wanted to rinse them twice, so that made it even harder. But that just makes me so thankful, so very thankful for how easy I have it today when I have to wash our clothes. So easy. That part she's talking about when they had the drought that year, and then it was even harder because then they had to load everything up and they had to take it somewhere else to wash it, down below Grandma's. They had to go down there. And for Opal and the kids, that turned out to be a really fun thing to do because they were getting to go somewhere and they got to play in the creek, and the mother fixed them lunch to take or dinner to take with them and fixed those pies. And it turned into like a day of frolicking, as they would have said back then. So they really loved it. But she says, looking back, she knows that was a real turmoil and a real struggle for her parents to do that. But again, she just paints them in such a wonderful light. She says, it did no good whatsoever to complain. Her parents just made the best of it, did no good whatsoever to complain. They just had to do it. They just had to. So they didn't complain about it. They just did it, even though it was hard. They had to wash their clothes, and because of the drought, they couldn't do it the usual hard way. They had to do the double hard way of taking them somewhere else. So I really love that part. And I love how she described them swimming and getting to play after all the work had been done, and getting to eat the pies, of course. And funny about them, of course they didn't know what bathing suits was, but how looks like the mother would have let them girls like just pin up their dress like the aunt did, but she wouldn't let them do that. She made them put on Burl's pants. And we complain about so much things today, thinking about even the times I've got to go swimming. Maybe I complained when I was young about not having the right bathing suit, or maybe I didn't have the right flip-flops or whatever it was. But they had to wear blue jeans, and they were still just so happy they couldn't stand it. They just loved it. They just looked at it as grateful as I should have been about things in my life, and should be today too. So I really love those memories. And when I was young, oh my goodness, to go swimming was just one of the best things ever. We played in the creek a lot, and we could do that anytime because it's a really shallow creek. Wasn't no worry of that. But here in Wilson Holler, there used to be a pond that my Uncle Ray built. That's where I learned how to swim. So it was a constant begging in the summer for somebody to go swimming. And Granny and Pap would not let us go down there and swim by ourselves in the pond. An adult had to be there, you know. And so I was always begging somebody to take me to the pond so I could swim. And but that was just one of the funnest things there was to do. Of course, I liked to get to go to the pool in town, which was rare, or get to go to the lake or something like that. I like to do those things too. I love to be around water just like kids do today. I do remember when I was in elementary school, maybe I was in about 3rd or 4th grade or something like that, there was two sisters that moved to our school, and they didn't stay long. I don't know where, I don't even remember their names. I just remember them, and I probably wouldn't remember them except that they were part of like a religious, you know, their religion was that women didn't wear pants. Like to school I wore blue jeans. In the summer I wore shorts, you know. And those girls did not. They had to wear a dress every day. And that's probably why they stand out in my mind, is because they were different, you know. The rest of us were just wearing whatever, and they had to wear dresses. But one time we got to go, must have been like on a field trip. And I can't really remember where it was. Might have been like to Fires Creek or somewhere like that, because I've been there on field trips. Maybe it was something like that. Maybe it was just to the lake to play in the water. But anyway, I remember that's what the youngest girl was my age. That's what she did, was what the aunt did. She pinned her dress between her legs, and that's how she went swimming. I don't remember if the rest of us got to bring our bathing suits. I'm sure we probably did. We wouldn't have went in our clothes, but that's what she did. So it just stands out in my mind because she was different than we were. I love the part about the mission when she's talking about Burl and Maggie getting to go off. They got a scholarship, so they get to go to Highland, to the high school. And she talks about how that most of the students that went, education-wise, they were fine. They could have just like stepped right in, and their learning was good enough that they wouldn't have had any problem. But where their problems come in was it was so drastically different, and from a cultural standpoint, it was so different. And she says most of them didn't stay. Like most of them would stay one term and then come home. But I love it that she says the mission ladies did not count that as a failure. Like they wasn't disappointed. Well, you only stayed one term. You just wasted. You know, no, they didn't. They said, well, you stayed one term and you got to see the world. You got to see that things are different outside of this little community. And you got to learn, you know, for one term. And so we're proud. That's good. You know, they really counted that as a success. And I think that attitude of just kind of accepting, we understand, you know, like to the children, like we understand it's just too much for you and you want to come home. We understand that. I think that acceptance of the mountain ways, maybe the mountain uniqueness of the characteristics of people and the stereotypes or whatever you want to say. Some people would have looked at that as a stereotype. Instead, they just said, that's okay. That's okay. You went and you done the best you could do and you learned a little bit, and that's wonderful. So I think that's why they were such a success at that mission, is because they kind of met people where they were at, and they didn't try to belittle the mountain people or try to shame them or anything like that. They just met them where they were at and helped them. But then you remember when they didn't want them to dig the well in the basement there, they just said, okay, we see this is too much. We won't do it. So I loved that about them counting all of the people that went, no matter how long they stayed. They counted it as a success too. Of course, it was sad because Opal, we know she loved school so much that because Burl and Maggie went, she had to quit school to help. But then in a weird way, she got to keep learning because she had her studies. She got to still stay with them at night, and then she would run home and stay all day and work and then go back. So she still did get to learn and soak up. She just wasn't in those classes all day long. Her desire to do that really shows how she wanted to learn, because like most people might have wanted to do that, I probably would have been one of them. But then after working those long days at home and then having to go back, I might have just been like, never mind, I'll just go to bed and rest and get up in the morning and start again, you know. But she just, like she says, she was content. She just stayed upbeat and happy and content. So that was really, really amazing to me. Interesting where she talks about the food. You know I love that part about it. Now she calls shab beans, that was those dried beans that they strung up on a string. We would call those leather breeches. Some parts of Appalachia call them shuck beans or shucky beans. So lots of, depends on where you're at, what you might hear those called, but they're all the same. They're just dried green beans, strung most often like she did, like she described, strung on a string with a needle and then hung up to dry. I have a video, I can link to that, where I show how to make them and talk more about it and show how to cook them. They're tasty. I did not grow up in a family that dried beans like that, but I've dried them several times, you know, in my married life. But Pap and Granny just preferred canning beans, so that's what they did. They just canned all their beans. I loved when she talked about the dried pumpkin. I tried that one year because I'd read, not in here about Opal, but in other books about people drying. Might have been Dory Woman of the Mountains, might have been why I tried it. But my pumpkin molded. Maybe I didn't put it in the right place, but it never dried. I have like a, looking over there because that's where it's at, I have like a thing I bought a couple of years ago and I've never even used it. It's kind of a mesh hanging thing with shelves, and the thought in it's to dry like herbs and stuff, and you'd hang it, it come with like a shepherd's hook, so you'd put it outside in the yard, but then nothing couldn't get to it because it's all closed in. Maybe I should try doing pumpkin in that this year if my pumpkin do any good. And then I thought it was really interesting about the apples. So I dry apples. I do it the easy way of using my dehydrator, but older women that I know, Granny and different people, they dried apples by laying them in the sun, you know, and then taking them in at night and putting them back out until they were dry. The dehydrator is way easier than that, of course. But interesting to me, Opal talks about stringing them. I've never really heard anybody else say they strung the apple pieces. Most people would lay them, you know, thinking about laying them on a cloth and putting them. Miss Cindy told me her grandmother had like a roof on the, I can't remember if it was the, I don't remember what kind of roof it was, but it was easy to get to, maybe on the smokehouse or something like that, and that she would put them on top of that roof. Some people put them, now, you know, after everybody had a car, you could put them in your car in the windshield and let them dry, and that way no bugs or yellow jackets or anything, flies could get on them. But I've never really heard anybody talk about stringing them up, so I thought that was really, really fascinating. Now, she talks about the sulfur in them. I've read about that all the years I've researched and talked about Appalachia. I've never done it, and I've never tasted them. Now, I've heard many accounts that says kind of like what Opal's saying, is that they couldn't tell the difference. A sulfured apple tasted just like a fresh one. But then I've heard other people say, well, no, they didn't taste just like a fresh apple, but they were good. And, you know, it was in those days, like Opal's saying, you had to put your food up or do with that, you might starve to death. So if you didn't, you know, way up in the winter, if you was hungry, some sulfured apples that you could cook and eat would be better than nothing. So I've heard varying reports on that, but I've never been part of that or never been able to taste them. But I would like to. I'd like to do that. Now there was something else as I was reading. I thought I should have wrote that down. I wonder now what it was. Seems like it was about the food. I love the part about the Sears and Roebuck. I don't remember how old I was when I first seen a Sears and Roebuck catalog, but I love to look through it and dream about all the stuff in there. The stuff that we didn't have, you know, whether it was, I can't think of stuff like in the kitchen or something, or toys or clothes that I wished I could have. But I can imagine in Opal's day that would have been really something. And then you wonder, like her people there, they just couldn't imagine that they just order something and they send it, or who would have even thought of doing that. Then today, of course, I don't know if you're like me or not, but if you are, we order lots of stuff online and it just shows up at your door. It kind of took out that middle step of, in the beginning at Sears Roebuck, you probably remember this, when you had to fill out the little order form and send it off with your money. You know, now that's all been cut out and you could just go online and order. But I thought it was real cute how people teased her and said, they must have ordered you from Sears Roebuck because you stay up here so much. I like that. The other thing was about there at the very end was about the Swing Low Sweet Chariot, about the phonograph. you can just imagine how excited people were to hear that music, and interesting how they didn't even tell anybody the first day when she brought it home and was showing Opal, and they just started playing it and singing, and how people just were drew to the music, and come in, and she says there wasn't even room for anybody else to get in. So that would have definitely been what we would say something like that was big doings. That would have been big goings on or big doings. They all had a big time, all those things. So really sweet to think about them all in there together. In this part, Opal too is kind of giving us a hint that something has changed, and she thinks that it's probably to do with the economy and things just not going as well, and so the help there at the mission has dwindled. So we'll just have to come back next week, and maybe Opal will talk more about that. But I guess this is her first inclination she's sharing. That's when she kind of first noticed things were changing. Of course, she says in this part, all the years later, she really doesn't know why they changed. Maybe just guessing from what she said, maybe a combination of the economy getting worse, and maybe that they had helped that mission so much. Maybe people thinking about people helping, their charities had turned in a different direction. I'm not sure, but I hope you enjoyed this part, and I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you. And as always, I hope you'll drop back by next Friday so we can see what Opal talks about next.